Let me at this point bring up one by one three developments that I imagine, going by what you've just been saying, would be of great concern to you. The first is this government's not so subtle attempt to make Hindi the link language, to promote Hindi and its status. And many believe that what lies behind this is an attempt to push the primacy of the Hindi belt. How do you respond to this development, which has been happening for a couple of years at least?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, there's nothing new under the sun, as the saying goes. This is at least the third or fourth attempt to do this. This is not some great innovation or genius on the part of the current regime in Delhi. The first wave of this happened in the 1930s, pre-independence. There was a huge anti-Hindi agitation in what was then Madras Presidency, including the loss of lives and riots. This was taken up again in the 1960s. Again, there was a massive anti-Hindi agitation in India, including riots and the loss of lives. Every time you try to homogenize people through language or any other way, you are going to find resistance from all those people, particularly all those people who, as I say, have self-respect and an identity. Now, you see, our cultures go thousands of years back. The language is the major artifact, the core of our culture. If you try to dilute our language using these kinds of subterfuge, we are going to push back. Let me ask the same question Perennier Anna asked. He said, if we have a two-language policy as a uniform policy across all of India, then automatically the mother tongue is the first language. You may remember that after independence, the states were carved out on the basis of differences in language, which at that point, the reason they carved out a different Uttar Pradesh and a different Bihar and a different Rajasthan and a different, Madhya Pradesh, was that they actually had their own languages. They were not all what you and I think of now as the Hindi belt, were not all homogenized Hindi. They had their own languages. But it was the insertion of Hindi that basically suppressed and killed off all these languages. And there's evidence to show that wherever you try to bring this homogenizing language, there's a problem. So what Anna said, let's have a two-language formula. Everybody uses their mother tongue as the first language. Everybody uses English as the linked language. The same linked language that connects all the states also connects us to the world. We think that's eminently sensible. We follow that in India. In Tamil Nadu. Now, if you say you need to have a Hindi component to it, and as the NEP says, a three-language policy, I ask the question, what does a three-language policy really mean? It means that those in the Hindi belt cannot have a two-language policy. They don't have the capacity to teach people English. They don't have the desire to teach people English. So they will all have a one-language policy of only Hindi. Therefore, those of us like people in Tamil Nadu will have to learn Tamil for our mother tongue, English to connect to the world, and Hindi to connect to those who are chauvinistic enough to only have a one-language policy, because only then we can link to them. Why is this fair in a democracy that you should have a three-language policy for the developed parts of the country and a one-language policy for the underdeveloped parts of the country? How is this fair? So we stick with a two-language policy, and we are completely opposed to either a three-language policy or the imposition of Hindi. If people want to study volition, any language under the sun, we are happy. We are a culture that prides ourselves on education, on knowledge, on erudition. We are wonderfully happy and pleased to support anybody who voluntarily wants to study any language. But if you make it a policy, we are opposed.
Now, the second development, which I imagine would be of concern to you, happened just about 3 weeks ago. BJP President JP Nadda publicly said that it was his party's ambition to electrically finish off regional parties, presumably to thus ensure that the party that rules at the center also rules in the states. How do you respond to this attempt to create effectively a one-party country?
I'm glad that Mr. Nadda's real kind of intentions and his ambitions on behalf of the party are out in the open. Maybe somebody can give Mr. Nadda a history book. He may want to think that that was what existed in India at independence. I think except one state or maybe two, every state was run by a Congress government, as was the union. In fact, during independence, I think all but two states were Congress governments, and Mrs. Gandhi had, during emergency, Mrs. Gandhi had two-thirds majority in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. How well has that turned out for them? So I think this notion, what Mr. Nadda's statement says is that it exposes that the BJP is simply a mercenary party that is driven by electoral and power ambitions alone. They don't have any value other than that. Because what they're trying to say is that anybody who has independent thinking, anybody who wants a separate identity, anybody who wants, listen, look at the scale of this country. Tamil Nadu is about 80 million people. Were it a country on its own, it would be about the 19th biggest country in the world. UP is about 200 million people. Were it a country on its own, it would be like the 4th biggest country in the world. Why should there be one party that runs all of this? They can barely do the job well of running the union. Why do you think they're going to be fit to run all these states? Now I ask a different question. The BJP itself is a complete can of contradictions. They are pro-beef in Goa and in the Northeast. You can get killed for carrying cows in the Hindi belt. How is this the same party? That means you say you have a party that has no core values, no core beliefs. All you want is a party that is a vehicle for ambition, for agglomeration of power and pelf. Let Mr. Nadda's statement, I welcome it. Let it be out in the open. Let everybody in the country understand what this party is really driven for. It's not for values, it's not for nationalism, it's for the personal ambition of the people who run the party.
Now, the third development that I imagine would be a cause of concern for you still only lurks on the horizon. I'm talking of the redrawing of Lok Sabha constituencies, which will happen sometime after 2026. The Hindu newspaper has calculated that there's a very good likelihood that Tamil Nadu, your state, could lose 11 of its 39 seats. That's almost 30%. Kerala could lose 6 out of 20 seats. How do you respond to this prospect? I know it's still a few years in the future, but how do you respond to it? Because it's a real fear.
Yeah, something is profoundly wrong in this country and has been for a long time. And I'll give you both sides of it. On the one side of it, the relatively well-to-do states are giving up more and more of their money to the union and to the poorer states. And unlike in every other federal society, that doesn't narrow the gap. Despite more and more net transfers of wealth, the gap between the poor and the rich states keeps on increasing. Not just increasing, accelerating. Something is structurally wrong. I made this point to the 15th Finance Commission. The second part is, if you have one person, one vote, then clearly if you have a situation where some states have one MP for 1.5 million people and some states have one MP for 2 million people, it's not truly representative democracy. So something has profoundly gone wrong in the way the states are administered, particularly if you take the fact that the poorest states in the country, the Hindi belt, also happen to be the ones with the highest population growth and the highest total fertility rate, and vice versa. The well-to-do states in the country also happen to have the smallest population relatively per capita or per square kilometer and also have very low total fertility rates. No other federal society in the world you can find this. Everywhere else, wealth transfers bring convergence in quality of life, and mobility of labor ensures that the greatest economic areas are also the areas of greatest population. We have a big problem in India. This is not going to be solved by light things. This is not, I mean, the redistricting is only the manifestation of a structural problem you have. And responsible leadership at the federal, at the union level should really have been thinking about these things much more profoundly than just about a date and time. How do we overcome? Don't we want everybody to progress? How is it fair in this country if some people keep on falling further and further and further behind? Something is wrong. You know, that's what national leaders are supposed to focus on, not power grabs and like homogenization.
Let me ask you this. Do these three developments, the attempt to promote and impose Hindi, the threat to regional parties that Mr. Nadda's comment symbolizes, and the redrawing of Lok Sabha constituencies, do these three developments have the potential to threaten the unity and integrity of our country?
These three developments are either symptoms or outcomes or artifacts of a profound problem. The profound problem is that this country is not developing evenly. The profound problem is that some parts of the country where governance is good and the values have been good are progressing well economically. Some other parts of the country are progressing well economically, but not with social justice. There's a huge difference between the economic progress of Gujarat and the economic progress of Tamil Nadu. In my preference, I would much rather have both have double the national per capita income, but ours being, let's say, 5 or 8,000 rupees less per person out of 3 lakh bench or base, we have 80% plus of our girls graduate high school. That number is only 60% of Gujarat. We have 4 doctors, almost 4,000 people. That number is only 1 in Gujarat. I would rather trade off that marginal 8 or 10,000 rupees out of 3 lakhs for the sake of having a more fair, more just, more inclusive society. But even these are only nuanced differences between Gujarat and Tamil Nadu compared to the difference between Gujarat and Tamil Nadu in one bucket and Bihar and UP on the other bucket. Something is structurally wrong. Parts of the country are being left behind. Hundreds of millions of people are not getting development. This needs to be fixed. All the 3 problems you tell me, or the issues you tell me, are artifacts, are outcomes of a profound problem in this country. That problem needs fixing.
But profound problems often end up breaking up a country. Does that danger lie ahead, even in potentiality?
Look, everything is potential, right? As many people have pointed out, the notion that you could carve out a country of what is now 1.3 to 1.4 billion with so much disparate history, culture, language, and keep it together for so long itself is a miracle. India today is a miracle. There is no other kind of example in history where you have brought such disparate cultures with disparate kind of food, language, history, brought them all together, created an administrative unit in 75 years, which is the blink of an eye relative to our thousands of years of history, and made it work successfully for the most part as a democracy. We are a miracle. The miracle is a threat any time of not being a miracle anymore, right? By the very fact that you're a miracle, you should be paying attention to ensuring you can make this continue. I'm not sure that enough minds are working on it. So, of course, then I'm always in fear that the miracle may not persist.